views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I'm Daren, Jaime, and of course, we thank you for joining us. And for those of you that know, the Social Justice Forums is a show that talks about many of the inequities that people face, particularly in a time such as this. We give you multiple points of view as well as promote civic engagement and invite you to be a part of this conversation. Stay tuned because the Social Justice Forums starts right now. And welcome back, and thank you for joining us. Starting off our show, the Thinkubator. The Thinkubator exists to train, educate, and connect Bronx youth to work-based learning experiences, employment, and educational opportunities. The think tank at the Thinkubator released a policy brief on remote education in the Bronx. The report examines the inherent inequities and challenges of remote learning in the borough, in particular, highlighting the digital divide and lack of accessibility to technology that allows students to learn, diversity and educators' preparedness for teaching remotely, economic and food insecurity impact, and the social emotional impact of COVID-19 sickness and death on students' learning. Here to provide more and share with us is the founder and CEO of the Thinkubator, Dr. Edward Summers. And Dr. Summers, good to have you.
It's good to be back on your show. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And so a little bit about what's going on these days.
Sure. So the Thinkubator, the think tank, just released this policy brief, as you mentioned, really focused on thinking about the digital divide and thinking about what are some of the inequities that exist with our education system. The report found that we know the statistics in the Bronx, right, in terms of, we are home to one of the poorest congressional districts, and that obviously has an impact on our education system. We know that 1/3 of young people in the Bronx don't have access to high-speed internet. 1 in 5 can't complete their homework because of lack of access to technology. So we know that these issues exist. We also know that the Bronx, because of COVID, has seen just devastation in terms of economic devastation, in terms of job loss. We're about a 17% unemployment rate in the Bronx. We've also seen number of deaths in the Bronx. We rank 5th in the country of the number of deaths and number 25th in the country in terms of the number of COVID cases. All of these have an impact on our young people in the Bronx and the way in which they're studying, the way in which they're able to complete their assignments, the way in which they're just socialized to learning online. And so the think tank decided to do this policy brief because of a study early on that James Waldron, was a 17-year-old apprentice with our organization, conducted on COVID-19 and its impact on youth. That initial study led us to think about, all right, so let's think about the challenges that young people are facing with remote education. And so what we learned from that study was that, one, the access to technology continues to be a challenge, particularly broadband and high-speed internet continues to be a problem for our young people. Also, we're learning that a lot of teachers have been trained to teach in the classroom, not necessarily online. And teaching online requires a different skill set and a different professional development that's required to teach online. And a lot of our teachers have just been thrown into teaching online when they don't necessarily have that skill set or that requisite training that requires to teach online.
Talk to me a little bit about laptops, because I did hear, and I've heard boots on the ground, that there are people who are saying that students don't have access to laptops. And so you've got this remote learning environment. The assumption is everybody's got a laptop, everybody's got wireless. But what we're finding, and I'm hearing, is that it's specifically not the case. What can you tell us about that? Have you heard that? And does your report cover that?
Sure, it most certainly does. Many organizations have started to step up and fundraise to support providing laptops to families. What we're learning is that many youth are reporting, and their families are reporting that what you can do on an iPad, you can't do you can't do what you can do on a laptop on an iPad. So, for instance, if you're in high school and you have to write a paper, it's very difficult to do that on an iPad. So the DOE has done a great job of trying to distribute technology, but there's just been a major gap. Organizations such as the Bronx Community relief effort, DreamYard, Here to Here have been working to bridge that digital divide and provide laptops to the community through their efforts. And so there are many more examples of organizations actually trying to bridge this digital divide by providing laptops. That accessibility challenge is real, and it challenges a young person to complete their assignments online. It's great to have an iPad, but you can't do everything on the iPad. You need a laptop to actually write a paper and to do more extensive research on issues that you're studying in school. So that remains a problem in the Bronx. That digital equity challenge in the Bronx Community Relief Effort and the Bronx Foundation have been very focused on this Bronx digital equity challenge.
Yeah. So from your perspective, how big is the divide?
I think it's huge. I think 1 in 4, the report says, of young people who attend schools in the Bronx don't have adequate access to technology. That's laptops and actually high-speed internet. And so you could have the technology, right? So you could have a laptop, you can have an iPad, but if you don't have access to high-speed internet, that creates some challenges. We see at the Thinkubator in some of our programs, our workforce programs, where we're preparing young people to work with companies, when they have to give their presentation, often they report to us the challenge of not having access to internet or not having a laptop to be able to do their presentations at the end. So it's been a problem in the summer when COVID first started, when we transitioned our programs, and it remained a problem this fall. And so we're trying to, as we line up our end of the semester programming and presentations, we're trying to find alternatives for some of our students. We have about 60 students in our programs. So we're trying to line up some alternatives for them to be able to use technology, borrow technology, to be able to report and present their findings to the employers that they've been working with. So it is a huge issue in the borough. And we're trying to do what we can to support young people, one, in their learning, but also in their work-based learning experiences where they're working for employers and have to present out as well.
The big challenge is that you've already got this divide of educational disparities already in African-American communities, communities of color, on the educational gap. You add the digital divide in, we have a compound problem.
We do have a compound problem, and what many are arguing that this year is a lost year, quite frankly, with COVID and the fact that we've had to rapidly, and all credit to the DOE in terms of being able to just rapidly change what their traditional model has been for years, right? But many are arguing that this year is really, the year and a half is really lost for many in low-income Black and Brown communities, particularly the Bronx, because of this digital divide, and where you have about 40% of people in the Bronx, or young people in the Bronx, learning online versus going in person. Now, this is a rapidly changing situation, right? Recently, the mayor announced we were going to close down schools, and now we're back to schools. And the new policy has been, if you were going in sort of this hybrid format where you're going 3 days a week, that's no longer the case. Now you can go 5 days a week. So there's been some changes in the education system, and it's quickly evolving. I think that our leaders are doing the best they can with the information that they have to respond to this challenge that we have. But many are arguing that this last year and a half is going to be a lost year educationally. And as we know, that sets back our community and our young people tremendously from a point where they're already disadvantaged, right? So they're going to be even severely more disadvantaged compared to their counterparts in wealthier neighborhoods and communities.
Do you agree with the theory that it is a lost year? I mean, I know a lot of people say it, but it may be a hard pill to swallow. But do you agree with that theory as an educator that this is a lost year?
Unfortunately, for some families, I do think that, and I see it in the community directly and in my own family as well, the challenges that relatives in my family have with working with their young people on virtual or online learning. Some of the folks in my family just don't understand it and don't get it and don't have the prerequisite training at home to help support their young people. So it is a challenging environment. So I do think for some, it's definitely going to be a lost year, and we're going to have to do a lot of makeup. I know at the Thinkubator, what we've been trying to do is just contain the same amount of rigor in our program offerings that we do if it was in person. We've tried to keep that consistency so that it's not a lost year. But I do think in many regards, it's going to be a lost year for a lot of people. And next year, it's going to be a challenging environment to catch up where we're already behind already because of the inherent inequalities and inequities in our system, particularly around funding, particularly around teacher preparedness, particularly around teacher retention in some of our schools in the Bronx as well. We're going to have a lot of work to be due next year to recover.
Yeah. The recovery effort, do you anticipate it being a heavy lift? Talk about moving towards next year and already looking towards next year. I mean, parents are really challenged right now. Students are challenged right now. But as an educator on the inside, how much of a lift is it going to be in this recovery effort?
Yeah, I think, we've learned a lot and we continue to learn a lot. I think that what's really, really important, and the policy brief indicates this in one of its recommendations, is that feedback loop and making sure that we're consistently getting feedback not only from teachers and administrators, but from families and students as well. I think that's going to be critical in thinking about the recovery effort. It's realistically, we're looking at fall of 2021 of when where probably things are going to be somewhat normal and not completely, right? And so I think that over this next couple of months, over this next 8 months or so, what we have to do is make sure that we're closing the feedback loop, getting as much feedback from all constituencies as possible to make sure that we have a recovery that's equitable and fair and that responds to the many challenges that our communities are facing. I think often what happens in recovery effort is that we don't engage a diversity of people and we don't have a diversity of perspectives and lived experience to formulate policy that makes sure that we have a recovery that's equitable, but the recovery that's for everyone, that will suit everyone and support everyone. So we have a lift. It's not insurmountable. We have some great people at the table. We have some great community-based organizations focused on supporting the DOE in these recovery efforts as well. And so I'm hopeful that while it's a heavy lift, we have great people who are getting it, who are understanding the challenges, and will create policies and procedures to have a fair and equitable and successful recovery come next fall.
When you talk about that feedback, obviously very important. I think it's the way that you grow. You grow through feedback. People can, ascertain better information and get a good pulse by feedback. What's been happening with regards to the feedback? Is there not enough going out, or are people being overlooked? How's it going?
I think that in general, what tends to happen is that people are often overlooked, particularly our young people sometimes. And so that's some of the challenges. And one of the things that we've been doing at the Thinkubator is our think tank is a youth-led, youth-centered organization that focuses on elevating the voices of young people and making sure that as issues and concerns come up, that we're getting that feedback. So we do that through the think tank. And then we, this fall, actually launched another initiative called the Thinkubator Leads, which is our youth council, which again focuses on elevating young people's voices and allowing them a platform to talk about some of these issues of major concern. So I think that we're trying to find at the Thinkubator and at other organizations and at the DOE ways in which we can get that feedback. But realistically, we're in the thick of COVID. And so we have to count that in. We're just responding to a pandemic, a crisis, right? We're in response mode, we're reactive. And sometimes feedback is just overlooked, right? Because you're dealing with whatever is on your table at that day. But I do think that we're trying to attempt to get that feedback, particularly from young people, because it's their experience, right? They're the ones going through what we are trying to implement. And so lots of organizations are trying to monitor and survey and have focus groups on young people to really learn from their experiences so that we can contribute to an equitable recovery that uses and includes young people's opinions and perspectives about how we should think about moving forward.
Yeah. What are you hearing from elected officials, community leaders, organizations as you put out your policy and you have this report? Talk to me about what the response you've been getting so far.
Sure, it's been a very positive response. A major trade organization called District Administration, which is a trade organization and produces a magazine and a publication for district educated leaders, looked at the report and marveled about it, and actually did a write-up on the report looking at the 4 policy recommendations. And what they called it was 4 COVID era lessons learned from the Bronx, which I thought was amazing. The fact that you can learn something from the Bronx, right? And other people around the country and around the world are actually looking at it. But more locally, local leaders have endorsed and embraced our report. A lot of our other community-based organizations have agreed with our recommendations and endorsed it and said that, we're on the money with our thinking about how we should think about the issues in the Bronx. And I go back to the Bronx Community Relief Effort and the Bronx Community Foundation, DreamYard Here to Here, who are doing really good work on pushing the issues around digital equity and trying to close that gap in the borough. And this report corresponds and relates very well to those efforts that they've been pushing out. So it's a report that we're glad that we pushed out, particularly because it was led by youth. It was led by the survey that James Waldron did, a 17-year-old apprentice, and the respondents for our survey that James Waldron did were all young people, no adults whatsoever. So we're leading and guiding through youth voice, and we do that through the research that James has done.
Yeah. So you got the report, you got the policy, you got the public support. The question is, where do you go from here?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have a great ally in the Bronx Executive Superintendent, Dr. Ross Porter, who we worked with this summer on a Thinkubator Solution Day, where the young people looked at how to think about school culture as we come back to school. So this is definitely a subject that we've been and will continue to engage Dr. Ross Porter on. Monica, a major from the BP's office, we've been in conversations with her to talk about the implications of this report. So we will make sure that we're working with our leaders to think about how we support them in these recovery efforts. And so that's how that's where we're going from there. It's just really being on the ground now and saying, we know what we know, we have these recommendations. How do we support you? How do we work collectively together to eradicate some of these issues and challenges that we're seeing in the Bronx?
Yeah. How do people get connected to the Thinkubator? I mean, you guys are front and center on the issue. You've got a good pulse on the matter. If somebody's saying, listen, I want to get connected, how do they go about doing that?
Just go to our website. You'll see the multitude of programs that we offer. The think tank has its own web presence and all the reports that it's produced. So you can find us at thethinkubator.org.
All righty, Edward Summers, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us and the great work that you're doing with the Thinkubator, and great work. As a matter of fact, James Waldron, as you said, inspired that, and so by a 17-year-old. So we can learn a lot from our young people.
Thank you.
All righty. Listen, we want you to stay with us. We do have more show. Don't go anywhere. The social justice forums will continue after this quick break.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, and they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community, and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scales of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting to the new reality.
Reporting from BronxNet, this is
And welcome back. 2020 has been a challenging year for many people across the country. DoorDash is actually committed to helping their partners during these difficult times. DoorDash was founded with the mission to grow and empower local economies. They recently announced a 5-year, $200 million Main Street Strong pledge to support merchants as well as local communities. DoorDash also partnered with the National Urban League on the Dasher Empowerment Partnership, which is a first-of-its-kind program designed to help Dashers from underserved communities attain new job skills and entrepreneurial success, as well as building generational wealth through financial literacy training, educational funding, and job programs. Here now to share a little bit more is the head of public engagement at DoorDash, John Horton. And John, good to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you and to talk to you about this important initiative, especially during troubled times. And as we talk about COVID-19 really wreaking havoc across the nation, numbers are continuing to rise, but yet and still DoorDash is rising to the occasion and providing a service and a much needed service through this grant. So talk to us about the grant and your partnership with the National Urban League.
For sure. Well, thanks again for having me. And as you mentioned in the intro there, our mission really is to grow and empower local economies. And you kind of hit the nail on the head that especially in these times with so many small businesses going through financial hardship and job loss with this global pandemic, we really have stayed true to our mission during these times and tried to empower both our Dasher community and our merchant community in a thoughtful and meaningful way. So just a little bit of background on that. When the pandemic actually started and the stay-at-home orders started, we immediately instituted personal protective equipment for all of our Dashers. We instituted financial assistance for Dashers that may have tested positive or presumed positive for COVID. On the merchant side, we instituted $120 million of commission relief and marketing support. And that has kind of really fallen under our overall Main Street Strong pledge that you outlined. We started, like I said, doing these relief efforts at the beginning of the pandemic, and we've continued to roll out new relief efforts with time over the course of this year. And specifically with the National Urban League, with the overall partnership with the Urban League, just as you said, is to help our Dashers from underserved communities really grow, build financial wealth, build generational wealth, financial literacy, entrepreneurship training, and we hope to roll out phase 1 of that partnership in January of next year in select cities across the country. And it's something that we're really looking forward to and collaborating with the National Urban League on. They've been a leader on these issues for some time now, and we couldn't have thought of a more perfect organization to launch our Main Street Strong pledge with, as it relates to helping and empowering our Dashers who are really providing an essential service in the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah. Talk to us about how COVID-19 has really impacted you and the work that you guys are doing as Dashers.
Right. I mean, the Dashers, like I was saying, they've really turned into essential workers and are performing an essential service. There's so many folks that are homebound or immunocompromised. And if you'll remember there in the city, there was a few months that outdoor dining wasn't even open. So delivery really was a lifeline, both on the merchant side, but then to those constituencies across the city that could not have gotten out. So we are incredibly proud of our Dashers who really are performing this essential service. And we think that we need to continue to give them all of the tools necessary, not only to continue providing this essential service by dashing, but to grow and empower and support themselves as Dashers across the city.
Yeah. I was taking a look at the notes and telling us a little bit about how the Dashers have actually increased during the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. 1.9 million new Dashers actually joined the platform.
That's right. Yeah, and it's just in these times with job losses and economic uncertainty, folks really have turned to this flexible form of earning opportunities in the form of dashing. On average, our Dashers only dash about 4 hours a week, and so it really has served as that economic supplemental income and lifeline for so many, not only New Yorkers, but really across the country, to be able to not only provide for themselves and make ends meet, but also support their communities.
Yeah. You're doing a great work with the National Urban League, who's actually a partner with you, and you guys are partnering together in creating this opportunity. Workforce development is huge. I mean, obviously in New York City, the unemployment rate continues to rise, and really to develop that workforce and workforce development is a much needed service. Share with us a little bit about the workforce development that will take place.
Yeah, so it really kind of forms into and goes into the overall, the point I was making a few seconds ago about it just really being that flexible earning opportunity. So many Dashers, they may be aspiring artists or entrepreneurs or wanting to start their own business or even, working to pay off student loans. And so we need to ensure that on the workforce development side, knowing that this type of earning opportunity is meant to be flexible, that we equip our Dashers with the opportunities to take that next step in whatever their career goals or economic goals may be. And actually beyond the overall work stream that we're standing up with the National Urban League in cities across the country next year, we've actually partnered specifically with the New York Urban League as well within the context of workforce development. We'll be providing job fair opportunities and training opportunities on how to become a Dasher, and how to support their community also.
Yeah. And when we talk about the New York Urban League, one of the things that you're doing is also expanding support for Black-owned businesses. And we know that that has been a big struggle, particularly for small businesses pre-COVID-19. But now with COVID-19, you're doing a great job of expanding support there too.
That's right. That's right. And back a few months ago in the early summer, we really stood up a series of programming to support our Black-owned businesses across the country, whose numbers will show that are the most at risk for permanent closure. So whether it was creating filters in the app to let consumers know which restaurants are Black-owned, or partnering on commission relief. We really have tried to dive in to get more Black-owned businesses into our Black-owned programming, and we're really thrilled to be working with the New York Urban League on bringing that programming not only to their constituencies, but just trying to get more New York restaurants involved in our Black-owned support for restaurants as well.
Yeah. So for somebody who wants to become a Dasher, talk to us about who can become a Dasher and what that process actually looks like.
Yeah. So I think you pointed out earlier, so many new people have came onto the DoorDash platform in the age of the pandemic, and in order to become a Dasher, you just need to go to our website, and there's a section for how to become a Dasher with all of the different requirements. But it's a relatively easy process, and one in which helps folks immediately start being able to earn those supplemental and flexible incomes.
Yeah, yeah. Talk to us about 2021 as we're getting close and we're on the verge of 2021. What do you see happening for DoorDash?
Yeah, 2021, it's a great question. What we've really tried to do, not only going into this winter, but into the winter of 2021, we really know that with the COVID numbers rising all across the country and in the city as well, that we need to just continue to provide support and programming for our Dashers and our merchants. And about a few months ago, we announced an initial phase of winterization, as we call it, or cold weather grant funding. And that is where we partnered with the New York City Hospitality Alliance to allocate $500,000 in New York City for restaurants with 3 or fewer locations to get up to $5,000 grants to help get them through these winter months. And as part of our Mainstream Strong pledge that we announced a little under a month ago, we're doubling funding across the country. The initial round of funding was $2 million. It's now going to be $8 million across the country to help provide those small $5,000 grants, which can be incredibly impactful as restaurants go into the winter all across the city. And in New York City specifically, we also worked with Councilman Jaime to make sure that the Bronx was represented, and we outlined our first recipients of those winterization grants last week, with several of them coming from the Bronx. So we hope to expand that program in 2021, continue to provide support for our merchants who are going into these cold weather months, especially in the age of COVID, while also standing up a lot of our first of its kind Dasher empowerment programming, like that partnership with the National Urban League come January.
Yeah. And when we talk about the Main Street Strong grants, that's an opportunity for people to actually have some, empowerment, particularly in the area of businesses. What have you heard from businesses amidst these times that maybe the average person may not be so familiar with? We know a lot of people have been impacted, but what are you hearing?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have, and we don't always think about what goes into running and keeping a restaurant, completely open, and especially with the cold weather and indoor dining being reduced and outdoor dining being an option. Restaurants just need support. They need heaters. They need infrastructure. They need those types of things to help them get them through the winter, knowing that a lot of their business is going to be from outdoor dining. So we're really trying to work to do that, as well as just roll out new products and features on the DoorDash platform that drive more volume and more marketing support to our restaurant partners. So that is, I think, overall what they need. And the think tank Center for an Urban Future in New York, about a month or so ago, that we were very honored to partner with them on, where they really outlined several things that restaurants may need going into winter. Everything from working with the city on permits to those outdoor heaters to other support mechanisms to get restaurants through the winter and hopefully a better start into 2021 than 2020 has been.
Share me a little bit about this perspective here. We know that when the orange and the yellow codes come out in regards to where we are as a status as a city, that sets restaurants back. Give us a little bit of understanding for restaurants, from a restaurant's perspective, is when we take these steps back due to the second wave and due to increasing numbers, the impact that it really has on the restaurant industry.
Yeah, I mean, it really does have a significant impact, especially on our smaller restaurants, which is why we really geared our winterization grants to those restaurants with 3 or fewer locations, so that we could really try to help our small business restaurants, because those are the ones that are the hardest hit when we have to take steps back due to the pandemic. So really working to help our small business restaurants get through this pandemic, and our small businesses all across the country and our small business restaurants really are the backbone of the economy in some of these markets. And so really working to help them, because to your question, those are usually the ones that are the hardest hit when these restrictions take place.
Yeah. And when we see these restaurants and they're trying to really recover, then they take this step back. The unfortunate thing is a lot of them will unfortunately have to shut their doors because they won't be able to really keep up with what's happening. Have you heard stories of many that have had to shut their doors simply because of this?
Yes, we've unfortunately heard some of those stories, not only in New York City, but really across the country. And I think that's where delivery services are going to play a key component into trying to help some of these restaurants get through these winter months. And I think it's up to us as DoorDash to ensure that while we step up to try to help our restaurant partners get through these winter months, that we do it in a meaningful way, taking into consideration the restaurant's needs. To your question earlier, and it's why we formed earlier in the summer a restaurant advisory council made up of those small business restaurants around the country who advise the company on restaurant needs, whether it's some of the programming and stuff we talked about today, or new features or software, whatever it might be. Really hearing from the small business restaurants through the Restaurants Advisory Council is something that we're really making a priority, and trying to continue to listen to roll out support for our small business restaurants as they get through this winter.
Yeah. And so you do a lot of support as 2021 comes into fruition. Hopefully you'll be able to get the support that you need in terms of being able to turn the corner on a lot of these issues that our restaurants are facing. Because when we look at it, our restaurants are really challenged right now, and they are pretty much the lifeblood, as you would admit, to many of our community.
That's right. That's right. And this pandemic, restaurants really have had their worlds turned upside down during this pandemic. And so anything that we can do, and not only as DoorDash, but we continue to engage with community organizations in the Bronx and across the city, really to try to bring folks together, experts in their field, to look at ways that we can help our restaurant and small business partners get through the winter, whether it's chambers of commerce, or whether it's the New York City Hospitality Association and others that we've worked with, really trying to bring folks from all walks of life and from a diverse set of backgrounds across the city together to see what all we can do combined to help our restaurant partners.
All right, John Horton, we got to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. Have a great week.
All righty, John Horton, our guest here on the Social Justice Forums. Stay with us. We have more show coming up. We'll be right back right after this. back to the show. The New York Urban League has led efforts and advocated for policies to economically empower historically underserved and disadvantaged New Yorkers, adapting in each decade to new challenges as well as opportunities. The New York Urban League commissioned a report called The State of Black New York, examining the position of Black households in New York City's growing economy. Compiled as an equity index, a quantitative tool for tracking racial equality in New York, in order to measure the relative status of Black New Yorkers, the report made progress made by African Americans across multiple metrics in 6 different categories, including economics, health, education, social justice, and as well as civic engagement. Joining us now to share a little bit more about that report and then some, we're pleased to be joined again by the president and CEO of the New York Urban League, Arva Rice. And Arva, good to have you back.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, and to discuss this, very important, as you said, your report comes out recently talking about the state of Black New York. Give us a little bit about this report in its historical context.
Oh, absolutely. So the state of Black New York comes from a long tradition. Vernon Jordan, when he was president of the National Urban League over 40 years ago, commissioned the first state of Black America. And at that time, African Americans and white folks were living in such a state of segregations that white people literally had no idea of the conditions of Black Americans. So talking about what we were experiencing at that time in terms of health, housing, education was shocking for the white community, and it was able, that information and that data served as a grounding for Vernon Jordan to be able to advocate for support of the African American community. And at that time, literally, there was a line in the federal budget that went directly towards urban leagues around the country to support our work. And since that time, urban leagues have developed citywide states of Black, New Orleans, states of Black of Los Angeles, state of Black of Chicago. And so we have not published the state of Black New York in over 15 years, and thought that it was appropriate during our centennial year to publish and have available the statistics that are available in this year's state of Black New York.
So talk to us a little bit about what we're going to see. What numbers and things that you can highlight coming out of that report?
Sure. As you mentioned, the report itself looks at 6 key areas, and the first one is really income and economics. And in that, we found the report, as you mentioned, was done in collaboration with Robin Hood with their poverty tracker that is done by Columbia University. We also looked at census data, and were able to produce the report in combination with the United Way and the New York Women's Foundation. And in this report, particularly when it looked at the area of economics, we found that over 52% of African Americans are still living with incomes $50,000 or less. In the city of New York, having to live on income less than $50,000. And that was a statistic that really stood out for me. And then we have others within the other core areas as well, including, not surprisingly, in health, a statistic that we're all unfortunately way too familiar with, and that's the fact that African Americans are twice as likely to die from COVID as a result of underlying health conditions or comorbidities that make us even more susceptible to the disease.
When we talk about those numbers economically, making $50,000 a year in a city called New York, and New York's metropolis, we know what rent costs are. We know what it costs to live out there. What does that say, given the fact that you have a net income of $50,000 in a city like New York?
Yeah, I mean, it is so damaging when we talk about, and heard when Trump was in the final stages of running for re-election, was talking how the African American unemployment rate was lower than had been in years. Well, right before COVID. Well, the fact is you had to look at, well, what type of employment did we have, right? So we may be employed, but if we're working and concentrated in the service sectors, we're not making enough in order to support our families. And so for a city that is rapidly gentrifying, it's important that we have and focus in on workforce development programs, entrepreneurship programs, all those that are designed to build the wealth and the incomes of African Americans.
Yeah. Talk to me about education, a huge factor here. We're talking previously earlier in the show, we talked about the digital divide here in the borough of the Bronx and across New York City. We're finding that students don't have the necessary resources. You would think that by now students have laptops, access to wireless internet to be able to effectively do virtual learning. Finding out that's not necessarily the case. Talk to us about what your education statistics revealed.
And thank you for connecting education and the digital divide, because they are inextricably linked. And that was definitely underscored during COVID. As you just mentioned, young people were sent home over the course of a weekend. And so we had 1.1 million public school children who were sent home, but the New York Urban League also works with college students. And so our Whitney M. Young scholars were also sent home over the weekend. And so they had to basically fight it out with younger siblings in order to see who would have access to maybe the one tablet that was available in their communities. One of the things that we also found in our report is that 54% of households who make $20,000 or less don't have any access to technology. The only access they may have maybe on a phone. They not have a laptop in their home. And as I mentioned, even if you do have a laptop, if you have more than one child, who actually has multiple pieces of computer equipment? And so the impact in terms of educational slide, we don't know the impact that it's going to have on our communities, but we know that it's going to be a huge one. And so we're asking for a very large investment in those communities, those zip codes, those neighborhoods where COVID has impacted us so much, because it's going to have such a huge impact educationally on our young people.
But one of the things I was able to uncover through your report is that the fact that if you're a college graduate, right? College graduates are going to fare a whole lot better in terms of avoiding poverty. And so there's something to be said about getting those students into the pipeline, getting them to graduate from college, and really positioning them towards a better, towards a better tomorrow.
The fact is that time and time again, absolutely what you said, that college really does serve as a way of prohibiting against poverty. And we have seen that over and over again in the African-American community. There's individuals who say, does everybody have to go to college? Clearly, there's some technology positions that are available where people can make six figures and more. But the fact is that people who graduate from college have less of a propensity to slide into poverty. However, also, once again, in our State of Black New York report, we're finding that young people are, Black students are faring 100 points lower on their SAT scores. And SAT scores, even though they aren't completely an indicator of how one will do in college, it is an indicator of whether one will graduate or not. And so the fact is that we're scoring 100 points lower than our white counterparts on the SAT. There's still more work that needs to be done there. There still needs to be a big push for college in order for us to graduate, because like I said, it is a great backstop for falling into poverty.
Let me walk to November for a moment, a historic moment for Joe Biden actually becoming the president-elect of the United States, garnering more votes than any other president in United States history. Much of that due to African-American support. When you look at Michigan, when you look at Wisconsin, when you look at Pennsylvania, when you look at Georgia, we could all point to, in Arizona, you can point to African-Americans turning out in record numbers in voting in favor of Joe Biden. Talk to us about this engagement, because there is a level of civil engagement that we're seeing. Are we seeing more increased engagement, not just the presidential election, but overall?
Well, that's the challenge. The challenge is for us to keep the energy that's come up in a presidential election and have it continue through the mayoral race that's coming. When we talk about selecting our district attorneys in Manhattan, it's going to be a very competitive race for our next district attorney. So I think that that's the challenge, is to make sure that people stay engaged. We don't have the final numbers, but we do know that the lines were long. And the lines were long in the cities where I have sister and brother CEOs that lead urban leagues. And one of my proudest moments of being an urban league CEO was getting on a call of all the CEOs shortly after the election, and people talking about what they had done in Milwaukee, folks talking about what they're doing and still doing in Atlanta, people talking about what they were doing in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. Every single urban league was involved in get out the vote efforts. And they did that in conjunction. It wasn't just us. We did it in conjunction with NAACPs. We did it in conjunction with Black Lives Matter. We did it in conjunction with smaller organizations and churches. because people realize how important this election was for us, that it was about the vote, but it was about our basic civil rights. And so the key and the challenge is to make sure that people stay engaged. We're absolutely ecstatic that we have Madam Vice President that's going to be coming into the White House, but we need to keep her and the president mindful that the African American community got them into the White House, and we want to hold them accountable to make sure that they keep our needs and our interest at heart.
A lot of talk has been talked about the president's, appointment process, right? And who's getting those seats and whether or not those seats are going to be filled. We know that we've seen women of color. There's still questions that are being answered about Black men actually being in that cabinet at high levels. We'll see exactly how that all plays out. But talk to me about awareness, because given the fact that we see a Kamala Harris that's now vice president-elect, given the fact that you see Vice President Joe Biden, who's now president-elect, and this whole political process in the wake of a Trump campaign, do you think that you're going to get more people engaged in civically for civic engagement, and also a part of the political process that extends even beyond like local politics? The school board meetings, NAACP, urban league. Will we see more people? Will we see this as a transition possibly in the communities with more people engaged?
Yeah, you said a lot there. I think that when it comes to these cabinet positions, we do need to hold the president and the vice president accountable. There is a gentleman who people are talking about for attorney general who just happens to be Kamala Harris's brother-in-law, but he's a wonderful candidate. He's done a terrific work at working at Pepsi, working in the Obama administration, and then working at Uber, and that's Tony West. And so we think that we hope that Tony will have a lot of eyes looked at him and him being considered for that role of attorney general. There's just so many incredibly talented and qualified individuals who could serve in these cabinet positions. And so we are looking with bated breath to make sure that even more African-American men and women are part of this administration. And I do think that galvanizes. I do think that energizes people. I do think that they look with more interest if you see people who look like you, who have had similar life experiences. So I do think that helps in terms of community engagement. And as you mentioned before, I mean, this is where we need to keep doing this work. We need to be able to connect people. If you're upset about what happened with Breonna Taylor and we understand it, then you need to understand who the DA is and how that person is elected and what you can do about that going forward, right? So if you're interested in and you were angered what happened with George Floyd, well, then how are laws passed around policing? Are they passed at the city level, or are they passed at the state level? And how can you be involved in state legislation in order to make sure that policing is more fair in your communities? So I think it is up to community-based organizations, it's up to media, it is up to civically involved and engaged individuals to make sure that we understand how things that are in the headlines connect to our daily lives and how we can have an impact on them.
You talked about, you brought up one name, Breonna Taylor, which will take me into my next topic of discussion, talk about social justice. And we see a lot of people on the front lines, Black Lives Matter, other movements that are really rising to the top in the wake of this criminal justice reform, in the wake of looking at police brutality and injustice. But we are seeing a level that we haven't seen since the 60s of political social justice involvement, but also people who are saying, listen, enough is enough. What can you tell us from your report and what you gathered from the social justice perspective?
Sure. One of the things that we found in our report, which I think was most troubling, was that African Americans and Latinos make up 92% of the state prison population. 92%. And this is statewide, and we know the numbers of who we are in the communities. We're less than 17% of the total population, but 92% of prison. I mean, that number's astonishing to me, and it's some place and space that we definitely need to work on. I have been invited to be part of this police reimagining project. Governor Cuomo made an edict, a declarative, an executive order that stated that every police municipality needed to present a plan to reimagine their police department by April 1st that had to be accepted by their local city councils. And so the New York Police Department is under that jurisdiction as well. And so myself, Wes Moore of the Robin Hood Foundation, and Jennifer Jones Austin of the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies are joining together in order to help to put together some of those recommendations. Our challenge is that there's individuals who have been doing this work, who have been marching from Black Lives Matters and a lot of other organizations. And it is important, it's invaluable for us to hear their voices. But I understand their frustration because they're saying that they have tried to speak with the NYPD. They've tried to have these conversations. And so what is it about this effort that's going to be any different from any others? So that is the challenge that we have right now, but we are trying to enlist, we're having conversations, we're having listening sessions, speaking for those persons whose lives have been negatively impacted by policing, in order to put out a set of recommendations that we hope that the police department will take on. And if not, we'll keep pushing and pushing and pushing. But it is important and key to this work that we take advantage of this moment in time in order to push for policies and legislation that will lead to more positive outcomes for African Americans.
We hear the topic defund the police, which has been very big, and a lot of people have been talking about that over the course of the last couple of weeks, in particular with heightened awareness, particularly after President Obama made his comments talking about it may not be the best thing to say if you want to win down in Georgia. But give me your perspective on that. That's been a social justice perspective, defunding the police. Are you in favor, or, of quote unquote taking those funds and reallocating them to other places to be able to do the social work?
Yeah, defund the police is a challenging phrase. I think it's a trigger for some people, so that they picture massive mayhem, and quite frankly, that's fueled by pictures and looping on Fox television that showed, a person looting in Minneapolis, and they kept showing that, and then underneath it says defund the police. When we talk about defunding the police, we're saying that the police department isn't involved and engaged in a lot of things that, quite frankly, we don't think they should be. We don't think that they should be responding to mental health issues. We don't think that they should be policing schools. We think that there's a lot of different areas and places in which their spokes have grown, and we think it's an inappropriate use of their services. We also think that policing departments have increasingly been given and militarized, so they have been given more and more equipment that makes them more militarized as an entity. And so we want to make sure that some of the monies that have been used in those areas, we don't think that that's a good use of money as well. And so we think that there are ways in which police departments' budgets should shrink. Yes, absolutely we do, but we don't believe in full-scale defunding of the police.
Yeah. Arva, where do you take the report and go from here? I mean, obviously the information is out there. People can have an opportunity to check it out, but where do you take it after this information is now disseminated?
Oh, what an excellent question. So we want people to be armed with this information. We don't want it to be, one person who has a chip on their shoulder, or Arva had a bad day, or that's her personalized experience. And so that's the reason why we put together a full set of data that says there are truly inequalities that exist in this country, and these inequalities are unacceptable. And so if they're unacceptable, what are the policies and procedures that we can put into place in order to change that? So we think that when it comes to income inequality, individuals need to have opportunities to create their own small businesses in order to be able to to provide for themselves and their families. I can say that as an individual, as the child of an entrepreneur, I believe in the power of entrepreneurship, but to be able to be armed with this data is a great way to go forward. We can talk about how there needs to be reform in criminal justice. An individual can talk about their experiences or even a set of, but in order to be able to talk about the fact that 92% of the population of New York State prisons is African Americans and Latinos, gives you a base to talk about and make these recommendations. And that's really what we want this report to do, is to provide people with a baseline of information, give them a set of recommendations that can also be found in the report, and then also give them the ability and the tools to push for positive change.
Yeah. And so for people who want to get their hands on the report, how do they do that?
Sure, they can do that by going onto our website at NYUL /SOBNY, which is the State of Black New York.
And there you can be able to download it and take a look and see all of the information. for you, obviously a lot to unpack, a lot to really deal with. As we approach 2021, how do you plan on approaching the work, given the fact that you have these statistics right here and clearly a whole lot of work to still do?
There is a lot of work to do in 21. I am both hopeful. I'm absolutely hopeful when I think about who is going to be stepping into the White House. This is a group of people that understand that in order to get out of the place and space that we're in, both in terms of COVID and economically, it's gonna require an investment in cities. And so I'm hopeful about that. I'm hopeful that the George Floyd legislation that can lead to better policing nationwide is enacted. I hope that the John Lewis civil rights legislation is put forward. As we develop a vaccine for COVID, we want to make sure that it is safe and that African Americans feel like they can participate and feel good about it, that this is not the Tuskegee experiment once again, but that it is a way in which to really protect our communities. And then also we look forward to having that investment, that economic investment, whether it's individual stimulus packages for individual families, it's investment of small businesses beyond the personal protection, the PPP that did not go to the communities that needed it at the most. And so I'm hopeful about some of the strategies that we have seen that have been somewhat effective in seeing those grow and develop over the course of the next year.
We didn't have a lot of time to talk about this issue right here, but it's pretty big. When you talk about particularly New York City and across New York State, the issue of gentrification. A lot of people being forced out of homes. I had a conversation on another platform, well, actually here a couple of weeks ago with my good friend who calls it progression. And so talk to us about what you're hearing about gentrification and the move to really quell that.
Yeah, gentrification is a tough one, and I can believe you did an entire news hour on it because it is an issue that goes back. I believe I may have talked about this the last time that we were together, but former Assemblyman Keith Wright had a great conversation with some of our young professionals and was talking about the importance of voting. And one of our young professionals said, well, it's so expensive here to live in the city. And, you can't even think about buying a brownstone or buying a house. And Assemblyman Keith Wright's response was, well, that's because people didn't vote for Mayor Dinkins. And people were like, what in the world is the connection? And he talked about how Mayor Dinkins had an investment in making sure that a lot of the properties, particularly in Harlem and in some other communities, stayed in ownership of the city. When Mayor Giuliani came in, he decided that he was going to sell off all those properties. And so when those places were sold off to developers, then it became less affordable. Also, when Mayor Bloomberg came in, he allowed for more foreign investment. And so the combination of not having city properties and the foreign investment led to increasing in prices here in New York City, making it literally unaffordable for most average African-American New Yorkers. And so as a combination of those forces, well, how did we get Mayor Bloomberg and how did we get Mayor Giuliani? Because we did or didn't vote. And so that was what Keith Wright was really underscoring for our young professionals, which was just an aha moment for them. And so I think it's important for us going forward to push for housing that provides for making sure that even if developers are building buildings, that there's a certain percentage of it that is allocated towards low income or moderate housing. And that is important for us to push forward. And we can do that by making sure that the individuals that we vote into office are representative of our ideals.
Arva, we got to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us here and sharing with us here on the Social Justice Forum.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
All righty. Well, listen, we have come to the end of our show today. We hope that you enjoyed this edition of the Social Justice Forum on BronxNet Television. Now, if you want to rewatch and catch the next episode or the recable cast, all you got to do is tune in right here to BronxNet TV, right here on Optimum, as well as on Verizon Fios. Then you can also be able to catch us on the web at BronxNet.org. Join us next week. We want to elevate the discussion, have more as we discuss the matters of social justice. Daren, Jaime saying take care, God bless, and thank you for watching the Social Justice Forums.